Today is an episode you don't want to miss. I got to talk to Alan Aragon. He is a leading nutrition researcher and educator, and he's very well known in the nutrition space. He is a pioneer in evidence-based fitness and nutrition. We talk so much about protein, about macros. We talked a lot about busting a lot of nutrition myths, such as seed oils, such as nutrient and protein timing, how to maximize your protein consumption, and does it really matter? We talked very simple numbers for you to take home with some take-home messages. Should we eat on rest days the same as we do on days we exercise? What's really important there? We talked about the missing macro. So many nuggets of information. Don't miss this episode. Again, share it with your friends. Do all the things. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's get to the show. All right, we are on. What is up, you guys? I am here with Alan Aragon. That's how I say your last name, right?
That sounds perfect. I mean, there's a way you can try to make it Spanish sounding, but I never do that, so you're good.
Okay, real quick side note already. Alan was the only person in the entire universe that has ever said my last name correctly without hearing it by just seeing it. Because I was on one of your Instagram lives many, many months ago, probably a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, I don't know. And you said Pam Grushak, and you said Grushak, and everybody says Grishak, and so I was actually pretty impressed. So,
I get things right once in a while.
Yeah, that was really good. So most people get it wrong. So you guys that are watching, this is Alan Aragon. If you don't know who he is, go follow him on Instagram. You probably already follow him, but if not, go look him up. I'm going to give him a quick introduction, even though he deserves a very long one. He is all over the place. He is a nutrition researcher. We settled on that, right? Nutrition researcher and educator of over 25 years. So I have followed Alan real loosely, I would say, since the bodybuilding.com era of forums. And he was on there. I just remember his name, and that's why I followed him on Instagram. So he's been around. If any of you guys know what those forums were, it was before MySpace. It was before all of the social media. He was on there spitting out facts, really just kind of digging into, I guess, the nerdy side of things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So way back, he's got lots of success in that. You are basically a leader in the, I would say, evidence-based fitness. And I say that, I don't know if that's really a thing. I know evidence-based nutrition, but fitness is something that I kind of obviously follow. So evidence-based fitness, kind of movement maybe. I feel like you're a pioneer into that. Kind of evidence-based kind of stuff that's kind of happening now. So that's Alan. Before we get started into lots of questions that my personal community, online community, again, CrossFit community, I always throw out who's going to be on. We have a lot of questions. But before we get started, I like to know, my favorite thing is always to know why you got into what you're doing. So why did Alan decide to go into nutrition research? What kind of drove you to be there?
I think that there was a lot of influence from my dad, who was into the whole training thing and the whole physique culture thing. And he was an amateur boxer at it for a certain time period in his youth. And so I got that influence from my dad. So my dad bought my brother and I the Weeder dumbbell set for kids that were like these plastic things filled with like cement.
Yeah, I remember those. I didn't have those, but I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so he encouraged the lifting and the weight training and that aspect, and it just kind of started from there. And I think everybody naturally is into being fit and healthy and well built, whether they realize it or not. And so I think it's almost kind of an innate thing to be into fitness and
Sure.
and health and just having a high quality of life. So it was just kind of natural. I don't know, that wiring plus the influence from my dad, I would say fueled it. And then of course things along the way, like the advent of bodybuilding at the mass scale, when you see the magazine covers back in the 90s, it was just a very stunning kind of experience to see those folks on the covers of magazines and go, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that is spectacular. That's fascinating. And so I've just always been fascinated by that. Um, and I just happened to stumble upon the beginning of the personal training option as a career, which started, well, technically in the mid 80s, but I didn't really catch on and become a semi-valid career pursuit until the early mid 90s. And then finally by the early 2000s, it was an established career path. But I just, I was able to catch that wave, which was really cool because I started off as an art major, um, just because I was just naturally good at art. But I was actually interested in the fitness thing. There just wasn't a definite, or in quotes, safe career path for that. And it took some breaking through and some courage to decide to go an unsafe route.
Yeah.
And it has served me really well. So
Yeah.
that's kind of it.
Yeah, I mean that's and I think you say, we all kind of care about how we look, and I would agree with you to an extent, but there the bodybuilding and kind of that physique look, it's still a very small percentage, I think, of the general public. So I think like
Mm.
I think when I started as well, we all had to go find the magazines, Oxygen and Muscle Mag, and all of those things to see them. There was a social media. We all care about what we look like, of course, a little bit. But you still, I would say, don't discredit yourself for that. So it wasn't like, that was probably just kind of a calling for you, maybe, that you were
Yeah.
kind of attracted to that and wanted to know the how and the why, which is
Yeah, for
different
sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
because, for me, it was more of how do I get there? But I don't really care about the why at this point. Like I just care how I look, like at all costs. It doesn't matter. And there's a lot of people that fall in that camp, but you were different and you went the route like, hey, there's got to be a reason why we're looking like this. What makes them
Mm.
get that way? So that's pretty cool, and that's very unique and different. So,
Yeah, it is. It is kind of different, and
mhm,
the way that I fell into the nutrition side of things is at some point along the way, I transferred out of my art major, and I had to make a decision about whether I wanted to go the nutrition track or the exercise track.
sure,
And back in the late '90s, there finally was the option to get a fitness oriented personal training certification, which was mainly being offered by the NASM at the time. And so I'm like, I'll just get the personal training certification and I'll formally study nutrition in school. And this is something that my girlfriend at the time helped me decide. So she gets credit for that.
okay,
Yeah. And so when I was done with my undergrad in nutrition, I just kind of on a whim decided, hey, I want to get a graduate degree in nutrition because every one of my classmates is filing off to become a registered dietitian, and I want to have some kind of competitive edge, or at least be on par with them competitively in the marketplace.
yeah,
But I wasn't interested in going the route that they were going, which was mainly the clinical route. So I got my graduate degree, and during my graduate degree is where I really kind of fell in love with the science aspect of nutrition and the research aspect of nutrition, and it just kind of fueled my I guess my interest in finding out, okay, what's scientifically correct here? Where are the gaps in our knowledge, and where do we need to sort of bridge the gap between the claims that are being made in the trenches, like the traditional knowledge in the trenches,
hmm
and what's actually been tested objectively in the research setting? Because, as you know, there's a lot of, in quotes, bro science and mythology and just unnecessary and sometimes unproductive practices that go on in the trenches. And people succeed in spite of that stuff and not necessarily because of it. And
yeah,
it was just really interesting to me to find out, all right, like how can science help out with this process of optimizing body composition and performance and health outcomes?
Yeah.
So yeah, I really caught the bug during my graduate degree.
Yeah, no, that's super cool, and it's very unique, and I think that's again why you're kind of the pioneer. And this is like, you've been around for a long time, but this is like another wave of your time, I feel, and it's so
Yeah,
exciting to
man.
see. It really is.
Yeah.
I love watching people's passions and careers kind of collide and take off. It really is one of my favorite things to see how they got started, why you start, and then just to see that progression. Super cool. It's inspiring, I think, for anybody to see.
I've been enjoying it, Pam, really. And what's really cool about you mentioning that it's fun to see people's careers sort of ebb and flow and evolve and flourish. Um, I remember Mike O'Hearn on the magazine covers
Hmm.
throughout like most of the 90s.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and it is just so fascinating to see his career like really take off 30 years after, almost 30 years after his appearance on the magazine covers. Like
Yeah.
he was just like a model back then.
Hmm.
Now he's a thing. Now
Yeah. Yeah,
he's like a household name.
like general
And
public would know who he was kind of thing. Yeah, not
yeah,
this just small amount of bodybuilding
that's right.
followers. Mhm.
And I never would have figured back in the 90s if somebody told me that, hey, Alan, you're eventually going to become friends with Mike. Like, how could that possibly happen? I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not in that circle. I'm interested in, the nutrition and
Yeah.
like I'm interested in PubMed and all that stuff. But somehow, some way, we connected through social media. We totally hit it off.
That's awesome. That's so
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, that's really cool. I kind of have a similar experience with, I used to follow, Monica Brandt,
Yeah.
for a long time, and I
Uh-huh.
actually had a chance to do, I did the very first Arnold Amateur when it came out, not the Arnold, but the Arnold Amateur.
Hmm.
And I had a chance at that time to do a photo shoot with her. It was a live photo shoot, and and that was towards the tail end of my competing career. But I said no because I didn't want to meet somebody I looked up to and them disappoint me. I was kind of in that
Mm.
mindset. I was like, no, I don't really want to. I really like her, and I don't want to not like her, kind of thing. It was weird, but
Yeah. That's funny.
so I didn't. But I actually got to know her just about 2 years back, and now we're friends. So it's kind of cool because I watched her on the covers. I watched her go from fitness. I used to watch her on ESPN in
Mm.
fitness competitions.
Yeah.
So kind of a similar story, but it is kind of really cool. But Mike
She,
O'Hearn,
she seems like Monica Brandt. She seems like a really genuine and humble person.
she's
So that.
she's her heart and soul is in fitness, and she is very professional. She carries herself well, and I think that's something that's sometimes lost along the way. And she's very genuine. I've got to know a lot of people within that industry, the IFBB and NPC, and met some really cool people, so that I looked up to along the way. So that's always really fun.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is cool.
Yeah. So, all right. So you got into all that. That's kind of your background. Now,
Mm.
again, there's a gazillion things that I could talk about. I have pages and pages of notes, but we'll just touch on this real quickly.
Yep.
We'll get right to it. The protein conversation. You don't have to go in
Mhm.
depth about protein. Obviously, kind of bro science meets real science is kind of where I put your category. Now, I have
Mm.
heard from other people I've talked to, like bro science always has a little bit of truth to it. So, they take tidbits of little things, and the bro science, for those that don't know, is basically like the meatheads in the gym that are, saying pound the protein. And then now that protein conversation has come back around, but
Yeah,
in a more scientific way, right? So
for
you have a
sure.
better
Mm.
understanding. So the questions are always, how much protein are we supposed to get? And I know you've talked about this on every single podcast, but let's just talk about it today too. How much protein in general should you get for fat loss, muscle gain, general body composition? And should it be distributed throughout the day, or should we get it all at once? For body fat and muscle gain, the general public.
Mhm.
Is that
Mhm.
that a good question? Like, can you answer that?
That's a
Okay.
that's a that's a loaded one. That's
I
a loaded
know it
one.
is, but I
Yeah,
kind of wanted to
yeah.
give it all to you so you could, because there's so many answers that could go. So that's kind of who we're talking to here. The general public wanting to lose some fat, gain some muscle, that are maybe beginner or intermediate exercisers. What's the protein number we should be looking for?
Okay, good. So that's good that you mentioned who we're addressing here, because
Yes.
usually with questions, they're usually just thrown out, and then I have to answer with a set of questions.
Right.
Like, okay, who are we addressing? What's the population?
Yes.
And what's the goal?
Hmm.
And what are the stakes? What's at stake? Are we talking
Hmm.
about the apartment complex pool trophy, or are we talking
Hmm.
about the looking good at the family reunion, or are we talking about, second versus first place at the state and national level?
Sure.
So, okay, so we've established the population and the stakes. And so we're
Hmm.
talking about the general public, and we've established the goal too, muscle gain or fat loss. So,
For
um,
overall health and longevity,
overall health and
too.
longevity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. We can weave that in there too,
Yes.
because they're related.
Hmm.
Um, before before talking about the protein distribution thing, like distribution meaning like spread out through the day, or how do we position the constituent doses and all that
Hmm.
stuff. Um, uh, we first have to establish that the hierarchy of importance goes like this. The highest level of importance is total daily protein intake, like
Hmm.
in total by the end of the day. If you nail that part, then you've covered like 90 to 95-ish% of what you need to cover to reach your goals. And so the way that you spread out the doses, or the way that you position the doses or distribute those doses through the course of the day, that is just the icing on the cake to get you that tiny little extra percent. If you have those kind of goals to push your potential.
Hmm.
So we have to get that straight first. Total daily protein is going to cover everybody, and they don't literally don't need to care about how many meals they consume it in through the course of the day and when. Just get
Okay.
it in by the end of the day. All right.
So the big
So
puzzle is protein. So we're right here.
mhm,
That's the big piece.
that's
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
Okay.
And so how much? General public, uh, on the low end,
Let's
low
say
end,
to average exerciser, meaning they're
average
meeting the
exercise.
minimum 150 minutes a week, 75 vigorous.
Mhm.
Our community here is going to be a little over that, so they're going to be maybe 200 to 300 minutes of exercise per week. With 5 days of weight training, no longer than 45 minutes. Okay, so that's going to
Yeah.
be their exercise threshold.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Okay, so we can base protein needs on total body weight, or we can base it on lean body mass. Uh, in a perfect world, we would base it on lean body mass, but we live in reality where estimating lean body mass is really just kind of a wild guess.
Yeah.
So it's just as practical and just as valid to base protein gram targets per day on either your current body weight, if you're at your target or goal body weight,
Hmm.
or you can base it on your target or goal body weight, which is kind of a proxy for lean body mass anyway, with a little bit of extra margin of safety
Hmm.
there. So total daily protein, the easiest target that kind of catches everybody's goals, and it's sort of the target where health and body composition sort of converge. Okay, so optimizing those two goals, and that target is 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, or for those in the freedom land, zero 0.7 grams per pound of body weight.
Okay.
So
Point
that
seven
is
is
sort
your
of
that's
the
your minimum. That's where you should go for.
uh,
Ish.
kind of.
We can say ish.
I am
I love that
of the
there's no solid
philosophy.
answer here. This is great.
No,
And I'll tell you why in a minute.
no. It's not absolute. I mean, technically, you can you can go down to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is about like half a gram per pound. You can go down that low and you can stay there, but you're not necessarily going to be covered during dieting phases with that amount. And you're not necessarily going to be maximizing rates of muscle gain at that amount. So it can be suboptimal, but if you're just not necessarily interested
Yeah.
in um, enhancing your body composition or optimizing body composition, strength, and muscle gain or retention, then you can just chill it as low as 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. But if you want to optimize these adaptations to training and you want to optimize body composition, then you are looking at a range of 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, which translates to zero point 0.7 to 1 whole gram per pound of body weight. And again, we're talking about target body weight or goal body weight.
Okay.
And so that would be for the general population who is either recreationally into fitness or and all the way to people who are, competitive in terms of athletics and stuff. That range, 0.7 to 1.0 grams per pound of body weight per day, covers pretty much everybody. Now, anytime you want to kind of go above that, then we're talking about a little bit more specialized goals. But for the Gen Pop, 1.6 to 2.2 kilograms, grams per kilogram of body weight, or 0.7 to 1.0 grams per pound of target body weight.
Of goal body weight.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
And so he's saying that if you're 200 pounds and you want to be 150 pounds, you'd get about 150 grams of protein a day, or a little bit less for the 0.7. Super simple.
Yeah,
For the point,
yeah, that's right. And so,
yeah, that's
if
going to be at the
you're
1 gram per pound of body weight. And you goal body weight, if you want to be 150 pounds, you're going to get around 150
there you
grams
go.
of protein at that 1 gram. Or
There
you
you
can
go.
go a little bit lower or a little bit higher on some days. It's really not that serious kind of thing.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
really not that serious, and honestly, most people will do just fine at the 0.7 figure.
Yeah.
A lot of people they easily consume more than that, and really there's little to no downside of highballing your protein. And the common worry is, what about my liver and what about my kidneys? Well, the evidence is just not there to support the idea that the human body cannot handle that protein. It just in general beyond certain amounts. If anything, it can't handle carbohydrate and fat beyond certain amounts, more than it can handle protein. In terms of just long-term adaptations and metabolic health and all that other stuff. And so total daily protein, it's not a hard and fast, you have to have this amount, otherwise your life is gonna not work out. As long as you're in the ballpark, then you'll be fine.
Well, now, and you said even if somebody, let's say, because a lot of people that I work with now, they're just not used to eating that much protein, and it's obviously it's very filling, and so they just kind of, and I'm like, no, don't worry about it. Like, just start with 100 grams and work your way up. So that 0.5 is still going to be beneficial if they're coming from a low place, right?
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To just increase it slowly. It's not pointless to not to let's say, because we have people that might say, well, I didn't get 135 grams of protein today, and they're like, oh, forget it, I'm not gonna, I'm just not gonna go for it again tomorrow. I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty good, so they kind of throw in the towel almost. Where 100 grams is still better and it's still okay, and if you feel good there and you're getting results, then that would probably still suffice. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, it would. And really, people can have healthy, long lives on protein intakes that are not high to the degree that we're talking about now. But if you just want to optimize muscle retention, especially into older age,
Yeah.
or if you want to get the most out of your training, and if you want to maximally control appetite,
Yeah.
then you really are kind of going to want to work towards the 0.7 grams per pound figure. And above in some cases.
Yeah.
If you,
Most people don't, I think, like you said, don't really have a hard time getting that in once they look at their food and realize how easy it is to really get that protein level in, especially if you're eating meat. It's pretty easy.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And if you're okay with
A protein
you
shake.
know protein shakes and stuff,
Hmm.
because I'll have 1 to 2 protein shakes a day. On the days I have 2 protein shakes, that's like 80 grams of protein taken care of right there through protein powder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it becomes really, really easy to get the rest of it from other sources like meat and eggs and dairy, and
Hmm.
the incidental protein from the plant sources as well.
And I think once you start thinking that way, I'm sure your family lives this way. Again, also I forgot to mention you have to go follow his wife. She's amazing. Lots of tips and recipes on Instagram as well. You guys are very protein forward, I guess,
Yeah,
in
man.
nature,
Yeah.
and so is my family. We're just kind of old. We're just old meatheads that just make a bunch of turkey and chicken in the beginning of the week and we just take out of that and put it in meals during the week and our kids just kind of know there's grilled chicken
Yeah.
in the fridge. So if you start to
Yeah.
live that way, I think that
Mhm.
it gets a little bit easier sometimes too.
Yeah,
Hmm.
there's a lot of mythology surrounding all the macronutrients,
Hmm.
including
Hmm.
protein, including
Yeah,
protein.
it's a big word right now, and I think it's kind of all over the place, and they'll it'll move on to something else in the next few months or years. Right now protein is the focus.
Right.
So I wanted to
Yeah.
kind of get that underway. That was a question across the board to get it from you, the answer for that.
Can
Um,
I add a little bit to it? Because
yeah,
I know that this is something that people wonder about, and a lot of people have this idea that you can only, in quotes, absorb a maximum of 30 grams of
that
protein
was
at
going
a
to be my next
time.
question. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's just not true, and there's a ton of data supporting the falsehood of that belief.
Hmm.
And there's a recent study that just rolled out within the last month, within the last couple weeks ish,
Hmm.
by Jorn Tromelin and Jorn Tromelin and his group, and Luke Van Loon's group in Maastricht University,
Hmm.
and they tested a 100-gram protein bolus. And they compared it with a 25-gram protein bolus, and both doses, including the 100-gram dose, there was negligible oxidation or loss of,
Yeah.
of protein. So
Yeah.
even if you were to sit there and have 100 grams of protein, especially if it was within a mixed meal, with the other nutrients, other macros, other foods,
Hmm.
then your body will take essentially as long as it needs to digest and utilize virtually all of it.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea that you're going to waste protein if you consume more than 30 grams at a time is false. Now, a kind of technical little distinction needs to be made between the body using protein for its multitude of metabolic needs
Hmm.
versus using dietary protein specifically for muscle protein synthesis.
Okay.
So
That's another
there's,
word that
yeah,
we were going to talk about. So
yeah.
just keep going. This is great.
Yeah. So when you ingest protein, the body can use it for a myriad of cellular processes, from just immunity to structural components of the lean tissues, the various lean tissues of the body, to just various cellular purposes. And the and muscle protein synthesis is not necessarily a major priority for the
Can
body.
you explain what that is really quick?
Sure,
What the
sure.
muscle protein synthesis is, and
Uh-huh.
then kind of explain the leucine. I know you're probably going to go into that, but those are a
Yeah.
couple of things that maybe my listeners would maybe not know. And
Yeah, sure,
hmm.
sure. So kind of taking a couple steps backward,
Hmm.
the your body's muscle mass, the way that what's going on with it is a dynamic process called muscle protein turnover. So there's a cycle of synthesis and breakdown. So muscle protein synthesis is the acquiring of new muscle proteins that can eventually turn into muscle mass.
Mm-hmm.
And protein breakdown is kind of the opposite. So there's this anabolic process of muscle protein synthesis, and then there's this catabolic process of muscle protein breakdown, and this is a constant cycle that's going on throughout the course of the day.
Okay.
And so when muscle protein synthesis outpaces muscle protein breakdown over time, then that's how you gain muscle mass.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how that works. And so in order to gain muscle, you have to make sure that muscle protein synthesis in the course of the day and certainly through the course of the week is greater than muscle protein breakdown. And we do that through a combination of making sure you have enough calories, enough protein, and that resistance training is happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the significance of it. So muscle protein synthesis is sort of a short-term snapshot measure of what would over time manifest as muscle growth. So studies that look at muscle protein synthesis are really looking at this short-term proxy for muscle growth over time.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome explanation. And I think some of those words get thrown around and people kind of don't know what they are. And then
Yeah.
people just use them. So there's your definition. It was very well put for everybody to understand. Yeah. So you're saying that our bodies can absorb, and it was funny. I was listening to a recent podcast that you were on. By the way, he was just recently on one of the top 10 health and fitness podcasts. So that was pretty cool. But I was listening to a podcast you were on, and and you kind of joked and said, what's the protein going to do? It's just going to spew out your ears, like when you don't have it. Like it's got to go somewhere, and it just made me laugh a little. I'm like, that's actually true. Like, where is it supposed to go? So exactly. So you can, and you said it was up to 100 grams was what they did the study.
That's the high dose that they tested.
Okay,
And you know what? For most people on the planet, it's just not practical. Most people tap out at like 50 grams at a
I could
time.
never eat 100 grams of protein at one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, maybe I could force myself because that's another side note of bodybuilding. You learn to not listen to your body, which is not good, but yeah, that's another conversation.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just actually listening to your body, I could never eat that much
Yeah.
protein in one sitting. Hmm.
Well, when you look at the body of studies looking at what single dose of protein maximizes muscle protein synthesis, there is typically a plateau at around 30 to possibly 50 grams.
Okay,
So
for that muscle protein
for
synthesis,
muscle
30. Yes,
protein synthesis specifically,
yes,
yeah,
for
it
building
kind of
muscle.
tends to plateau. Right,
Yes,
right. So the recent study by Jordan Tromelin comparing 25 grams with 100 grams, you really kind of wish there was an intermediate dose there
right.
to
Where
see
does it stop?
whether there is a plateau in muscle protein synthesis, because in the majority of previous studies it does plateau out, and depending on the population, depending on the
Yeah.
exercise protocol, and depending on the training status of
Hmm.
the subjects, it really does have a ceiling effect of
Sure.
30,
So
30 to 50-ish grams. Yeah,
so basically he's saying get 30 to 50 at a time, and you'd be safe to say that's going to help promote the muscle growth that the
that's right.
majority of people are looking for in regards to um, training and muscle strength and gain. 30 to 50 grams.
Yes,
Don't go
yes.
pound 100 grams of protein just because somebody on the internet said there was a study that said you can digest 100 grams of protein. That's probably not the best bet.
Yeah. And Pam, there's the theoretical side and then there's the practical side.
Hmm.
So I want to emphasize that even though theoretically, and this is a paper that I wrote with my friend and colleague Brad Schoenfeld, where we asked the question, how much protein per sitting is maximal for building muscle? How much
Hmm.
protein per meal? And we looked at all the research, and we arrived at the conclusion that it's somewhere between zero point 0.2 to 0.25 grams per pound of body weight. Now that's protein per meal that would maximize muscle protein synthesis. So for my friends abroad
Hmm.
who don't like pounds, 0.4 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight would be the per meal protein dose
Mhm.
that would maximize the anabolic effect, or that would maximize muscle protein synthesis.
Mhm. Okay. And so that's all. We all have heard the. Okay. One last question to go to that.
Oh, and remember what you're going to say, please. Remember,
I
I
got.
wanted to add that I would speculate that there's not much difference between somebody perfectly distributing their protein like that,
Mhm.
with the zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.6 doses over the course of 4 meals to reach that magic 1.6 to 2.2 daily total.
Mhm.
Okay. I would speculate that there's not a meaningful difference between doing that and splitting it up in 3 meals.
Okay. So okay.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter meal timing is what you're saying, because that was probably another question.
The
Was how many
the spread.
meals?
How
Yeah.
how many meals? How many meals you do it?
Mhm.
Like, I think that we can look at theoreticals all day, but in the real world, eating mixed meals and being in the fed state for most of the day anyway, I think that a minimum of 3 protein feedings a day is going to take care of that for
Yeah.
most people. Now, if you're a competitive bodybuilder and you're on the fringes of these extreme physique goals,
Mhm.
then it might not be practical to get anything less than 4 protein feedings a day to hit your
Right.
totals.
Yeah, I think I was like
Yeah.
4 to 7 times a day I was eating,
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
long, long time, many, many years of my life. That's
Uh-huh.
just how my life was structured because that's the life I lived. But that's very different than what I live today.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't work for me. It just as a mom and that kind of stuff is just not fun to bring your meals all the time. Um,
And
so
and and at the risk of making you forget what you're gonna say.
I wrote it down.
Okay, good, good. I'm gonna add one more thing.
Hmm.
For the goal of muscle gain and the goal of fat loss appear to have different needs as far as protein feeding frequency in the
Okay.
day.
Okay.
So, for somebody who just wants to maintain an average level of muscle mass
Hmm.
while losing fat,
Hmm.
the amount of protein feedings a day really, it doesn't matter at all. Like, if
Okay.
somebody wanted to go wild and have 1 meal a day and get all their protein in 1 meal, and there is a fringe population like that,
Hmm. Yeah.
then they will likely retain their average amount of muscle mass
Yeah.
while losing fat. Um, because and there's a lot of research showing very low meal frequency, 1 to 2 meals a day,
Hmm.
or even just eating every other day,
Wow.
0 calorie alternate day fasting.
Hmm.
Still, what people are still holding on to their lean body mass. Now, if you were to try to use that, try to maintain alternate day fasting and try to gain muscle as quickly as possible, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And most intermittent fasting variants uh, um, are not going to be conducive to muscle growth. But my point is, if you're trying to lose fat as a primary goal and
Hmm.
keep muscle, then the body is much more forgiving and resilient in the face of low frequency of protein feedings in the course of the day or the week.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. So my next question, it was just kind of all related to that too. And what he's saying is you can eat all your protein at once. You can eat 1 meal, 2 meal, 3 meal, 4 meal, whatever fits in your life and your day. Don't overcomplicate it. Go for a number, aim for that, and you can still gain muscle as long as you're having the output and getting the protein most of the time, 1 meal, two
yeah.
meals, what have you. Now the
Yeah,
question
and
is,
and and if you're
uh,
trying to lose fat, the body is much more forgiving of that low meal frequency. If you're trying
yeah,
to lose fat, if you're trying to
if
gain
that's your
muscle at a high level,
mhm,
then you've really got to kind of pay attention to distribution and getting those doses and hitting that
throughout the day.
frequency
Yeah.
throughout the day. That's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
And again, so this kind of goes with that too. Was my just real quick question.
Mm,
Again, my husband and I, we are just very kind of protein forward. We're used to just having meals, 3 meals, two snacks. It's kind of just life. Sometimes we skip meals, and so it all kind of it's kind of just the way that we live. However, my question was, okay, so you have the 30 to 50 that kind of makes sense for muscle gain. And I mean, I would be lying if I'm not always trying to gain a little muscle, especially as we age. I think you use the word gaintain, and I loved it. I
Yes.
hooked on it, and I tag
Yeah.
you when I use it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of gaining while we're maintaining what we have, because as we age, it's a little bit
For
harder.
sure.
Um, but what about like those 10-gram, 15-gram snacks of protein, where you're not kind of getting that maximum protein synthesis or leucine? Is that kind of, should we wait to eat those? Is it pointless just to eat an apple? Can we eat, like, my husband's a big beef jerky? Can he, does that count towards your protein when we're trying to gain muscle? Or should you just save it and put it in a bigger meal?
That's a darn good question. Muscle protein synthesis is more like the magnitude to which it happens is more like a dimmer switch
Hmm.
than an on and off switch. So the low doses count as
Okay.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're safe to just keep eating the beef jerky and apple in the middle of the day, or cheese sticks or something.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
you guys, for listening, this is specifically talking about muscle gain and fat loss. Because there is a line where, healthy eating can kind of have this skewed perception where people get very, I hate to use the word disordered, but sometimes it can get to over that line. So I want to make sure I speak to the people that do listen to me, that we do talk about those things. um, you don't have to freak out about it. And just know that when I talk about like the small amount of protein and the 30-gram protein, the 50-gram protein, that's really just for maximum muscle gain and kind of a general idea. Um, and that's why I wanted to bring that up. So Alan's saying, yeah, it's fine to eat those snacks as long as your protein at the end of the day is meeting
Yeah.
where you
I
want.
It's worth emphasizing, Pam,
Mhm.
that if you get the cake right, then that stuff is just the thin layer of icing.
Yeah. So I really
Yeah.
wanted to make sure
Yeah.
I noted that and talked about that for a second, because some people can misunderstand these conversations, and they can, I mean, because there's only little sound bites on social media and all
Mhm.
over, and that's where I think, unfortunately, wellness gets this bad rep right now. Um
Yeah.
and fitness and health in general, because people hang on to these one little sound bites that they heard, and then they just hold it black and white
Mhm.
when life is not black and white.
That's right.
So I
Agreed.
just kind of wanted to throw that out there too. That he's not saying, I'm not saying, the industry isn't saying you have to do those things. This is just where the research is. And
That's
this is
right.
just for
Yeah.
you to know and to put it in your thought process when coming up with the way that you want to eat in regards to your goals.
Yeah.
Right? We're safe to
Preach it.
agree on that. Okay.
Good word. Preach it.
I just always want to throw that out there, because I think there is just this big misconception sometimes when people are looking up to you, or maybe myself or my husband or anybody else that they might look up to in fitness, and think, well, gosh, I have to eat that way. I'll never accomplish that. Well, no, it's not. This is just the research. You'll find your way along the way. Um, and these are just for you to know. So, AKA, nobody's judging you if you don't eat 30 grams of protein at every meal.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And even that objective is like it's a specialized objective,
Yeah.
and in some cases it can be a practical thing, like with the elderly population, for example, who only eats like two major hits of protein a day. It's like you
Yeah.
really want to push them into try to hit a certain minimum per meal,
Because it's
and
hard for
don't
them.
skip
Yeah.
meals.
Yeah.
It is hard for them.
Yep.
Yeah.
I am an intensive cardiac rehab director, um, as well. So I have the privilege to work with, heart patients, and a lot of them are much older, and they really don't understand the protein conversation. So I'm sure walking into my cardiac rehab, they never knew they were going to get a bro for their for their director. And I teach them, though. I love to teach them, to bring that to
Yeah.
them. We exercise, I teach a lesson, and I feed them protein, so I know they're getting that protein. And I'll lead some of them to this conversation because they're interested in some of it. But I do like that you brought up that older population because not everybody has bodybuilding, goals or even physique goals. These people are just trying not to fall down and break a hip.
Yep.
So you're saying like break that down a couple meals, make sure you get your total number because generally speaking, they're only eating one or two protein meals a day.
Yeah, if you can encourage them to like, look, instead of skipping breakfast or having this really tiny amount of protein that's just incidental within the stereotypical
Hmm.
breakfast, try to proactively get a solid hit of protein at breakfast,
Yeah.
just as a start of boosting your total daily protein. Because typically the pattern of protein intake amongst the elderly population, they'll get like 5% of their protein needs at breakfast, and then they'll get like another 10%, 10-20% of it at lunch, and then they'll get the big hit at
At
dinner. And so
dinner.
it's like this really skewed type of distribution that really kind of lowers their chances of hitting a proper daily total absolute amount of
Yeah.
protein grams that they need to hit. So one of the strategies is to just find the meal that they really tend to skip, or they tend to really skimp on their protein intake, and just provide a solid hit of protein at that meal just to kind of bring everything up.
That's actually a really good idea and a really good tip that I will bring to people too is to find, because we all do the, log what you're eating, see how you're doing, see how your day is. And we do that as well across patients and clients, both. But to say, okay, well, you're not getting a lot of protein here, it'd be an easy fix to just add some protein to that meal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really great take home tip. Um,
Hmm.
so kind of while we're talking about this, and then we'll leave to talk about a couple other macros. um,
Cool.
so let's go back to kind of the recreational, maybe once in a while competitive CrossFit athlete. Okay, because I
Okay.
told you, my husband, we have a CrossFit gym. Well, he has a CrossFit gym. That's what he does. And so they're going to want to know how does this look in a day? Can you give us a real quick snippet of what it could look like for a day for a morning exerciser that typically likes to work out fasted? Because that's kind of it's kind of whatever you want to do, right? You can work out fasted or not. Doesn't matter a whole lot. You can tell me yes or no. That's just kind of
It depends on the goal.
okay. So
The
the goal would
specific
be a,
goal.
a CrossFit athlete. They just want
Okay.
to get stronger at their lifts, and maybe they compete once in a while. But how could their day look for eating
Okay. That's actually a tough question to put out. You
in
know,
general? Let's say somebody that works out at 5 a.m. and
mhm.
then they work a generally inactive job,
And do they have performance goals?
and
Do they want to continually get better from a performance standpoint?
yeah, they all want to get stronger.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, if
With body
performance is the
fat minimum.
primary, okay, with body fat minimum, you almost have to choose what is your primary here.
Mhm.
But okay, let's imagine it's dead even.
Okay.
Performance and looking like an Adonis. Okay.
Mhm.
So since the performance element is there, I would not actually encourage fasted training,
Okay.
because there always is going to be at least an edge for people who are competing or training in a fed state versus just a complete overnight fasted state.
Mhm.
Um, Now, it is possible for people to get accustomed enough
Mhm.
to fasted training to be able to at least maintain and tolerate it and get it going. But I wouldn't say ultimately that would be the optimal approach to do it. So
Okay.
if you can give yourself some lead time to have some pre-workout fueling,
Such
just
as
a mixed macronutrient meal, protein targets being what would maximally stimulate, or at least robustly stimulate muscle protein synthesis, somewhere in the on the low end, a 20, 25 gram range, the high end, 40, 50 gram range of protein, and a roughly equal amount of carbohydrate.
Okay.
And fat, I can kind of take it or leave it at that point. But lead time pre-exercise is going to vary with the individual. Some people just don't feel good at all unless there's at least 3 hour gap between the completion of the meal and the start of the training bout. Whereas some people, they're ready to go, and they prefer it like, within 30 minutes out, 60 minutes out.
Yeah.
And it can depend on the size of the meal the person eats as well.
Hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why it's hard to kind of universalize a scenario.
Sure. Sure.
But
I
but yeah,
appreciate you
I would
trying.
say, yeah, no problem. I would say if performance is an objective, then don't do it fast.
Okay.
At the very
Fair.
minimum 2 to 3 hours out, have a mixed macronutrient meal. And then
Would you say like low in fiber, or would it be something that was a little faster digesting carbohydrate within that couple hour range versus like a higher fiber, or does it
yeah,
kind of vary?
if it's a couple hours out, then it won't necessarily matter
Hmm.
if it's a typical sized meal.
Hmm.
If you are the type to fuel like 30 to 60 minutes out, then you're gonna want to pare the meal size down a little bit. And fiber can, I could sort of take or leave the fiber thing, honestly,
Hmm.
unless somebody has this proclivity for just pounding super high fiber meal like immediately pre exercise, and
Yeah.
that could present some issues during the training bout.
Okay. Okay. So eat a little
Yeah.
something, and
Hmm.
then after they exercise, which is, an hour or so, let's say 2 hours,
Hmm.
with their, maybe they're doing some cardio, maybe they're doing their CrossFit exercise and cool down. So let's say 2 hours. Then what would a post workout meal look like for them? Let's say it's a 190-pound male
Hmm.
that is looking for those performance and goals.
So the interesting thing, like, you start with the protein dose.
Hmm.
So if you want to kind of get technical, then it's like you might as well make the protein dose maximize muscle protein synthesis.
Sure.
And the way to do that is making sure the dose is somewhere between zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is roughly 0.2 to 0.25 grams per pound
Okay.
of body weight.
Post
So once
workout.
again, for most people, you're looking at this 30 to 50-ish gram hit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
And carbohydrate, for something like thing about CrossFit, it's not necessarily a pure endurance thing.
Yeah.
And unless you have more than one competitive bout in the day,
Hmm.
then the post exercise carbohydrates are not, they're not really going to be crucial.
Okay.
Like from post exercise on, if you're just having one session in the day,
Hmm.
then the carbohydrate, you can consume it at your convenience as long as you hit the targeted total by the end of the day.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's good to
but
know.
I am much more of a stickler for being locked and loaded with a pre-exercise meal,
Hmm.
rather than okay, post-exercise you got to get carbs in. Okay, get the protein in, take advantage of your feeding opportunities for to create these anabolic spikes in
Sure.
muscle protein synthesis, but you don't need the post-exercise carbohydrate to be co-ingested with the protein post-exercise in order to maximize the anabolic response, or to maximize even recovery, unless you have another competitive bout happening within the next 8 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
At which point, yeah, you would want to
Hmm.
fuel up with carbohydrate, but that's more of a pure endurance sport with multiple events in a day type of thing. There's a rich body of literature, Pam, looking at what happens when you consume protein versus when you consume protein plus carbohydrate post exercise,
Okay.
and measuring muscle protein synthesis.
Hmm.
And once you cross over a certain dose of protein, then additional carbohydrate does not further anabolic the anabolic response. It does not further muscle protein synthesis. Some may argue that, oh, okay, well, it might further the inhibition of muscle protein breakdown, but there's multiple studies that have looked at net protein balance, and that would be a very small factor, if at all.
Yeah.
And not only that, I mean, we can look at a study by Hulmi, Hulmi, and colleagues. This was a 2015 study. And the only study, amazingly, to look at this, where they compared a group of trainees who consumed just protein post exercise with a comparator group who consumed protein plus carbohydrate post exercise. And both of the doses of protein and the combination dose, they were both robust doses.
Hmm.
No difference in training adaptations
Oh,
by
wow.
the end of the study.
Yeah.
And there was no significant differences in total macronutrient intake between the groups, but the main point is, for the goal of muscle size and strength, it's like, okay, total carbs by the end of the day versus how perfectly you shove them next to the protein post exercise.
Yeah, no, that's great information. So you could say if you wanted to eat more carbs at dinner, you could do that, or you could do it post exercise. It really doesn't matter.
That's
That's
right.
interesting because I think
That's right.
old school bodybuilding, we always timed our carbs, for fat loss was always like post workout, like that's your biggest carb,
Yeah.
and that was obviously that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that was always kind of one of those things that was drilled into your head, like you have your carbs and your protein post workout, but it's really the protein that matters. So that's a good take
It's
home.
it's really a protein that matters. And you know what, Pam? It definitely won't hurt
Mhm.
to have the carbs at that time. And if you're hungry at
Yeah.
that time, then by all means, have protein and a heck of a lot of carbs.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody who is economizing on your total energy intake, and by extension, you don't have all the carbs in the world to work with
Yeah.
through the course of the day, and you would rather consume it, let's say at dinner, and you train in the day,
Mhm.
then you're not shooting yourself in the foot by shoving your carbs over to the dinner point rather
Yeah,
than
no, I
forcing it
love
post
that.
exercise.
That's really great information because again, that's one of those kind of misunderstandings, and where people get bits of information. Maybe they just didn't we didn't know before, and then they haven't bothered to look into it again. So there's that part of it too. So that's really good information. I personally like to eat carbs after my exercise. I like to eat a little bit before, like a couple dates and a protein shake or something. Then I'll exercise, and then post exercise, give me a big old protein smoothie bowl. I don't know if you have those Ninja Creamies, those ice cream makers. I look forward to it
I've
every day.
I've heard of them. I
You have
haven't
to have
tried
one.
it. I haven't tried it. I've heard of them though.
So great. So there's a good 40 grams of protein. Just
Yeah.
it's amazing. I'm like, where was this when I was competing? And then a big old bowl of oatmeal or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's my preference, and then
No,
I
that's
can
that's
taper off
great.
carbs during the day, and I don't it doesn't bother me. But a lot of
And
people like their
the
carbs at
beauty
dinner.
of it is you can individualize it, right? Because
Hmm.
that's your preference, and that's totally great. And you
Yeah.
take somebody else, let's say they're working with less carbs allotted to them than
Hmm.
you are, and they have sort of a little bit more limited opportunity to
Hmm.
as to how much carbs they can consume and when. And if they do have a preference for a more carb heavy dinner, then that option is available to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And yeah.
No, I love that. And my husband is the opposite. So he would rather just he's usually working a lot during the day. He's just going to have a quick shake and maybe, to get his protein and maybe an apple or fruit or something, where he
Yeah.
likes to save his main carbs for dinner because he likes to sit
Hmm.
down and enjoy his meal. Where
Yeah.
I'm busier at
Yeah.
night, so I would rather just not. So it's all
Yeah.
kind of a preference thing.
It
Um
absolutely is. Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that the science backs that, and that's okay.
Hmm.
That's okay to do because you still do wonder sometimes, like, am I really maximizing this? So that's good to know. I
Yep.
do want to from that go into there's a couple kind of myths that I kind of want you to talk about, or buzzwords maybe that I
Sure.
had questions in my Facebook group. I said that I was going to talk to you, and we had some questions in that group. So a lot of it was you know muscle gain and all of those things, protein timing. Went over that. um, and fasted workouts. We talked about that. But the one thing that we wanted to talk about was fat adapted, carb adapted, and can you ruin your metabolism? So there's three questions. So
Mm,
what is fat adapted? Um,
mm.
that's kind of a word that kind of gets thrown around. And then carb adapted as well, I guess would be the same question.
Okay. And there was a third one. What was the third
Yeah,
one?
the fat adapted, carb adapted, and then can you I guess it would be the starvation mode. So let's debunk that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, yeah,
Can you
yeah,
ruin your
yeah.
metabolism?
Yeah.
And can you? Because we still hear it to this day, and well, they'll say, well, I'm not losing any weight because I'm not eating enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've gone
Mm-hmm.
into starvation mode, and so let's kind of talk about that. Peel those back a little bit.
Yeah,
Fat
sure.
adapted,
So,
carb adapted, starvation mode.
okay. So, fat adaptation, it's also called keto adaptation,
Hmm.
and it's a purportedly magical state that you reach when you carb restrict to a severe enough degree for a long enough period of time.
Okay.
And so what keto proponents tout as fat adaptation is this sort of magical state where you enter and you sustain um, elevated circulating levels of blood ketones, which is what
Hmm.
happens when you carb restrict to roughly 50 grams of carbs a day or less.
Okay.
And within a 2 week period, your ketone levels will be maximal. And within a 1 week period, your levels of fat oxidation are going to be maximal. And so that is what's called fat
Fat
adaptation or
adapted.
keto
Okay.
adaptation.
Hmm.
Now, here's the important little detail about being fat adapted and the aspect of keto adaptation where fat oxidation has reached maximal levels. We're not talking about specifically body fat oxidation being at maximal levels.
Okay.
Your maximal levels of fat oxidation are measured by something called the respiratory quotient. And so when the respiratory quotient is lowest, that's an indication of that you are, in quotes, burning the most amount of fat. But with a ketogenic diet, 65 to 85% of the diet is fat.
Yeah.
So when you increase your dietary fats, you increase the amount of fat you oxidize. You increase circulating fatty acids, you
Hmm.
increase intramuscular fatty acids. And so yeah, you're a fat burning machine,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean like you're burning off fat from your love handles.
Ah, yeah. See, people
You're
get
a
it missed. They get it twisted. They get the
you're
terms twisted.
you're a fat burning machine because you've got a stick of butter coursing through your digestive tract.
So how can you not burn it, right?
You burn what you eat,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
And so and this is
So there's
why.
really no there's no benefit to doing that other than if you want to eat a lot of fat.
Okay, so there are some benefits, but they tend to be temporary.
Hmm.
So like a lot of people are under the impression that yeah, keto is special. You enter this special metabolic state where you're a fat burning machine, and look at all the studies showing keto outperforming high carb, low fat for weight loss and fat loss and stuff.
Hmm.
And while yes, there are a lot of studies showing keto outperforming the conventional high carb, low fat diet, or certainly the standard American diet, standard Western diet
Yeah.
for weight loss and fat loss, while keto does, there are a ton of studies showing that it's superior to that for weight loss and fat loss. When you collect all the studies that do the right thing and match protein and
Hmm.
match total calories between the diet groups, then you don't see an advantage of the
Because
ketogenic diet.
keto is low protein. True keto is
Keto,
lower protein, right?
the original, the original keto was like
Okay.
it topped out at like 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilo max
Mm-hmm.
for protein intake. Like when Jeff Volek and Steve Finney put out their keto book for for their paperback,
Mm-hmm.
they advised against going above like 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. Otherwise, you might get, in quotes, kicked out of ketosis.
Yeah.
But subsequent research, particularly by Louise Burke and her colleagues, they found that even protein intakes above 2.0 grams per kilogram, so right around a gram per pound,
Mm-hmm.
still keeps you in ketosis.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that is sort of
That's news to me. Mm-hmm.
it's sort of a long-standing belief that you need to be low protein to remain in ketosis, but the march of
Mm-hmm.
research kind of disproved that within the last 5, 6, 7 years.
Okay, so that's pretty new.
Yeah,
And then what about carb adapted? Is that a thing, or is that just another word that people are putting out
yeah,
there?
that's kind of not a thing, I gotta
Is that
say.
just saying that you can process and digest all macronutrients at that point?
Basically, I mean,
Okay.
the body is perfectly well adapted to handle each of the macronutrients.
Mhm.
The only, in quotes, macronutrient that the body has trouble dealing with is actually a toxin, which is alcohol.
Yeah.
So it has very strict limits as far as what kind of maladaptive things happen beyond certain
Mhm. So
dosing
would you
thresholds. For
consider the missing macro alcohol or fiber?
it's definitely, I would say, it's fiber that
Okay. Okay. Me too.
that we
I've
need to
heard it both
focus
ways.
on. Yeah, yeah, and
Mhm.
I want to throw a little wrinkle in here with the topic of carb
Mhm.
adapted. Um, People have varying degrees of glucose tolerance,
Okay.
and this is determined by lifestyle,
Mhm.
by genetics as well,
Mhm.
by certainly by the training program aspects, the training goals that determine the person's lifestyle and habits and training program and all that stuff. People will vary in their glucose tolerance or their ability to properly handle and partition carbohydrates towards lean
Yeah.
tissue versus towards fat tissue. Once again, it's a combination of genetics and environment that determine that.
Mhm.
So it's not it's not right to universalize a carbohydrate prescription for
Mhm.
everybody.
Mhm.
It should be based on personal preference and tolerance, especially when you're talking about certain populations like diabetics, pre-diabetics.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
They don't handle carbs in the same way that the normal population does. So,
No, that's a great point because there's going to be a lot of different people that listen to this
mhm.
in all those different camps. So that's a good point to bring up. And then the last one of that question series was starvation mode. Is that a thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that is a juicy question.
It's heard all over the place. I'm not losing because I'm not eating enough. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's never
Yeah,
happened to me.
there has been a lot of research done on the starvation mode phenomenon.
Hmm.
And as you mentioned, it's where people think that they're not eating enough calories and therefore their body's metabolism comes to a screeching halt.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so that does happen, but not to that dramatic degree that people think it does.
Okay.
And the research showing that it does happen was on people with severe degrees of obesity who underwent extreme diets, like the Biggest Loser contest.
Okay.
So in the Biggest Loser contest, there was a roughly 15% drop in resting metabolic rate
Hmm.
that couldn't necessarily be accounted for by drops in metabolically active tissue like lean body mass. And so there's this sort of mystery drop in metabolism with that population who underwent just extreme, like semi starvation for prolonged periods of time with super duper high amounts of cardio.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Not a
it's
lot of
sort of
resistance training.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a recipe for disaster.
Sure. For a lot of
And
things, right?
yeah, yep,
Health wise. Mm-hmm.
yep.
Um,
And so that's one end of the whole um, metabolic adaptation example, the spectrum of examples
mm-hmm.
there. But if we go a little bit more realistic in the general population, so the only way that you can incur a in quote slowing of metabolism
Mm-hmm.
is if you lose weight too quickly and you lose too much lean body mass. So if you can avoid those things, then you will be fine. You won't experience this massive drop in quotes metabolism. And usually what happens, and this is where it could get complicated. I'm going to try not to complicate this answer.
Mm-hmm.
When people diet, their total daily energy expenditure can go down through a number of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it can go down through active energy expenditure, and or it can go down through their resting energy expenditure or resting metabolic rate. When people diet, if they maintain their lean body mass, then their resting metabolic rate will not drop significantly or meaningfully.
Okay.
Um, what does often happen, and this is common across dieting studies, is that people's non exercise activity,
Mm-hmm.
thermogenesis or NEAT,
Yeah.
or the non exercise physical activity, you can call it.
Mhm. That was a
It,
question, so we're answering that right now.
yeah, that's what typically goes down 2 to 300 calories very commonly
Okay.
in a given dieting study that lasts a number of weeks.
Okay.
So, and that's the thing that people overlook is that drop in non-exercise activity, and that's
Mm-hmm.
really the tough thing to measure in a lot of cases. And that's where
Yeah.
people sort of think, hey, I'm exercising the same,
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do, I'm eating the same, but I can't lose weight. Well, you're burning less calories through non-exercise activity that happens sort of subconsciously. You're fidgeting less, you're
Yeah.
walking slower, you're laying around more, you're not
Because you're tired from
yeah,
dieting. Yeah.
right.
No, that makes sense. Yep. I
Right.
actually
You're
heard
in a
something.
survival mode. Your body wants to preserve as much energy as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, I heard one of your podcasts you were on, and you talked about that with people that were trying to gain muscle, and it was really
Yeah.
hard to gauge because a lot of these guys were eating all this stuff, and then they weren't taking into account they're fidgeting, and they did it more often because they were
Yeah.
just kind of eating more or what have you. So I think there's a lot of gray areas in all of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because
Hmm.
like when you try to gain weight, the same thing happens. Because
Yeah,
all the body wants to do is survive. And the
right.
body's definition of surviving is just keep everything the same.
Hmm.
Don't lose too much weight, don't gain too much weight. So that's the body's biological drive, is to just stay the same. Just
Hmm.
preserve homeostasis at any by any means necessary.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, even when people try to gain weight, it's really typical, like for studies that impose a 1,000 calorie surplus and
Hmm.
sustain it for a number of days, and certainly the ones that sustain it for a number of weeks, then you'll see non-exercise energy expenditure go up by 400 calories on
Yeah.
average.
Yeah, and I always use my husband because bless his heart, he's a hard gainer. Where he just gets to, even into our 40s, he still just has that metabolism that is not mine. It's much different. Where he would try to gain weight, and it was
Mm.
just it's he tends to even move more, and you notice it. So
He's
it's just
lucky,
yeah, he's just one of those guys. So.
fortunate. He's a fortunate guy. Yeah.
Yeah, but he works hard too, so
Yeah, we got to make sure we throw that in there.
I don't want to take that away from him. He does work hard, but I see, he's genetically, I see it in my son too. He's the
Yeah.
same build and the same way. He's constantly fidgeting and moving, and even in his sleep, that kind of thing. So,
Mhm.
we talked about the fat adaptation, and now the other thing I wanted to talk about too. You kind of brought that up. Was when you first begin, okay, first of all, the um, the set point theory. Is that a thing? And if it is, can you explain it? Because you kind of just talked about how our body wants to create this homeostasis.
Yeah.
Is there a point where, like, if we diet so long and then our body just wants to go back to this one certain weight? Can you explain that? Do you kind of
Yeah,
understand what I? Okay.
that is an epic question.
Mhm.
Okay, so the set point hypothesis or set point theory
Mhm.
essentially says that our body knows where it's knows the spot, knows the weight that it wants to stay at, and
Mhm.
it'll always gravitate towards that no
Sure.
matter what we do.
Yeah.
So we can try to get out of that for a temporary period, but our body will always kind of creep back to that.
Mhm.
And so it, the cynical view would be yeah, it's kind of pointless to diet because your
Yeah.
body has a set point that you can't beat.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the old thinking. So the newer thinking, and this is based on the collective research evidence,
Mhm.
is more of a not a set point, but a settling point.
Okay.
Okay, so the settling point, it means that you can move your set point. You can
Mhm.
establish a new set point
Mhm.
by building certain habits, certain lifestyle habits, and so just sort of rewiring your routine.
Okay.
So when you rewire your behaviors, when you rewire your routine and your habits,
Mhm.
then you can actually rewire your biology.
Okay.
Now, with that said, Pam, this doesn't mean you change your genetic ceiling for fat gain or fatness
Mhm.
or your genetic basement for leanness. You can't
Mhm.
change that.
Because
And we
that's
see
just
this
what you're
in
given.
that's
Yeah.
just what you're getting.
Mhm.
Because, and I'll just give you an example of how these limits present themselves. With what, let's look at the a bodybuilding competition example, and then we'll look at kind of the general population. So with the bodybuilding example, people are literally different levels of leanness on stage, but you
Yeah.
know damn well that they work just as hard as each other.
Yeah.
And some of the people who are not as lean as some of the other guys, they actually tried
Worked
even
harder.
harder
Mhm.
than the guys that go ahead and Kevin Levrone it up there, and there's just
Yeah.
like, oh, I think it's time to start prepping. Like 6 weeks out, I'm just
4
gonna,
weeks out. Okay.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
grow into my contest weight and show up more shredded than everybody.
Mhm.
And it's like that's genetics,
Yeah.
okay? And so your limit for leanness, you can't mess with that. It is what it is.
Mhm.
And so we'll take that example to the real world. Some women can push extraordinary levels of leanness without much consequences.
Mhm.
Whereas other women, once they start dipping below 15%,
Yeah.
oh, menstrual cycle just stops.
That's a great point.
And
Mhm.
so then you have to make a decision. Do I keep pushing this? Is it worth it? What's
Yeah.
going on, for the long term?
Yeah.
Whereas other women, 15%, 14%, 13%, oh,
12%. Yeah.
still have the menstrual
Mhm.
cycle. It's like, huh?
Mhm.
Okay. This is definitely genetic limitations and advantages really showing their faces here.
Yeah.
And then, okay, on the other end, let's say somebody has a goal of gaining as much weight as possible. Some people will have definite limits to
Mhm.
practical limits to how easy or difficult that is.
Mhm.
And so yeah, it's like this. Here's your genetic limits for fatness, genetic limits for leanness, and some people will sort of look like this. Some people will
Yeah.
sort of look like this. Some people will
Mhm.
sort of look like that, and you can't change that. But there's this margin in between, okay, in
Mhm.
between these limits for maximal fatness, maximal leanness. That in between space,
Mhm.
you do have control over that. And
Okay.
that
Lifestyle.
is determined by lifestyle, by habits, by routines, by the countermeasures you set
Mm-hmm.
that can battle a tendency towards either overeating or in some cases undereating, in
Sure.
more rare
Mhm.
cases undereating.
Yeah. I don't know how people forget to eat, but that's other people. That's not me.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Not me either. Oh man, trust me. That's why I'm so interested in this dieting stuff, because I definitely, oh man, I love to eat,
Yeah.
and
Same.
if I let that go unchecked,
Hmm.
then yeah, it's not optimal.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
So,
I totally I see what you're saying, and I guess, that old thing was set point theory. I remember again very the late 1990s, early 2000s when I first started dieting. Um
uh-huh.
and that was kind of brought to me because I don't have the best genetic pool. But I knew I needed to live a different way because I didn't want to
Mhm.
happen. I saw a lot of stuff happening in my family that I didn't want to happen, so I went that other
Yeah,
route. And I remember a coach telling me, well, if you skip past, my body always wanted to hang around this one number, and if you get past that for 8 to 10 months, then you can change your set point. And I remember him telling me that, and maybe there was a little bit of truth to that, saying because by a year's time, your lifestyle will change. That's
yeah,
probably where that
yeah.
maybe came from. And so
There
so
and
that.
there's many examples of this,
Hmm.
Pam. There's
Hmm.
many examples of people who look completely different and have held it for many, many years.
Yeah.
And the common thread amongst those people is lifestyle change,
Yeah. Yeah.
sustainable lifestyle change. And this is not to say that there are differences across individuals in terms of their appetite response to foods.
Sure.
Some
Sure.
people are definitely more hungry more of the time than other people, and that's a genetically determined
Hmm.
characteristic. But there's always a solution.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different satiety levers you can pull within the diet to
Hmm.
counteract and help those people who are hungry or hangry
Hmm.
more often than others. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I do love that, and I think that probably just you just explained that very well. That kind of probably falls into kind of changing your lifestyle, kind of changing your body structure a little bit through muscle mass and that kind of thing. I used to always
no
say, well,
doubt.
just want to gain as much muscle as I can so I can eat more. Like that was that was one of my things behind it. Like I like to eat, but I didn't want to gain a lot of body fat. So that was always kind of one
I
of those
love it.
things.
I love
So
that.
so
I
that
love
makes
that tactic.
I mean, why not, right?
Yeah,
Um,
it's win-win. If there's
yes.
ever a win-win, that was it.
So that was a really good explanation of that, and we can kind of control that. And I think you said, there's lifestyle and there's preferences, and then there's
Yeah.
also cultural differences and things like that that are
Mm,
important to
yeah.
you, and all of those things. So we kind of put those things aside. I don't want to take too much of your time. I could be here for like 3 hours. So, um, we
Yeah, me
talked.
too.
This
We just scratched the surface here.
I know it. I know. Maybe I'll have to have you on for another one sometime. When we get more
Yeah,
questions.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so we went over the protein numbers. We went over the missing macro, which was fiber. We didn't get a whole lot into that, but we all know it's important. Can you give us a quick, maybe base number of what somebody should look for in fiber? Because I think with my own, again, I don't do nutrition plans. That's not what I do. I help people work out and remind them to work out and show them what to do. But general stuff, I'm like, hey, here's the numbers. But I always will emphasize fiber next to protein. So
Yeah.
what's a
Yeah.
general number we should go for fiber?
Okay, so the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they put out a position stand. It's showing a little age, but
Hmm.
um it's still valid. And so in their position stand on fiber, they recommend, and this is really close to what the Institute of Medicine recommends as well. So it's
Hmm.
like these convergence of recommendations from major health agencies can be a good thing. I mean,
Yes.
it's better than just like listening to Joe Blow
No,
in
I
law.
love it. I love it because I think it gives a lot of clout to the answer, and people can trust that at least to some degree
Yeah,
when there's the two that combine. So,
sure. And at least
mhm.
this stuff is at least has been peer reviewed. You know what I mean? It's not
Yeah,
straight out of somebody's blog entry or
yeah, and that's where we get in
so
trouble. Hmm.
yes,
Hmm.
yes. So the target is 14 grams of fiber for every 1,000 calories you consume in the diet.
Okay.
So with, let's say, a typical 2,000 calorie diet, you're looking at 28-ish grams of fiber as a target. If you go over that, no big deal. And in fact, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they don't really set an upper limit to fiber
So there's no upper
because
limit. Okay.
because it's sort of, what they do say is, if you just keep your fiber sources to what's inherent within plant foods,
Hmm.
then it's just really difficult to consume too much fiber
Too
by
much.
eating whole plant
Yeah,
foods.
yeah, it would be pretty hard.
I mean, it is possible to supplement with fiber and then load it up to a detrimental degree, but just
Yeah.
getting it through food, I
I don't
see their
think
point
people
that
would do
it's,
that too often. I think
yeah,
I don't think people
yeah.
would get too much fiber too. I think they would probably know when to stop. Um,
Yeah, there would be certain limiting factors there that would
yeah.
definitely make them stop.
Yeah, so that was my next question. So I usually threw out the general number of 25 to 30. So I was probably pretty in a
So
good
you're right
range
there,
to
yeah,
tell people.
yeah,
And I would tell them that over any carbs or fat, I would always just say, well, get your protein and then your fiber, and then I don't really, you can figure out the rest.
yeah.
That's what I would kind
Now
of tell
that
people.
that's a good approach, and
Hmm.
that works for the majority of people with general
Yeah.
fitness and health goals. Yeah.
So you said, and this was the next question, fiber types. So obviously you want to get it from, I think we're all kind of on the same camp. Again, anybody that's listening to this is pretty much in the same camp of eat. We all know to aim for whole foods, and we're not eating a lot of ultra processed foods. That's kind of not, that's not the lesson here. We're probably all there. But is there any preference of fiber? So whole foods, but let's say somebody's just really having a hard time getting those fiber numbers up. Can there be like a supplement fiber or something like that that would be beneficial for people?
Yeah, there's a lot of research showing the benefit of just simple psyllium husk,
Okay.
like
Hmm.
Metamucil.
Yeah, Metamucil. Yeah, I used to take it when I was
Uh,
bodybuilding. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's actually quite a lot of consistently favorable effects shown by that for
Hmm.
people who, for people who can't get their fiber numbers up.
Yeah.
But of
And so
course,
it
it
would
would be preferable to get your fiber up through the
Whole
stuff that's
Foods.
inherent in food, whether you
Yeah.
get it from a combination of whole grains, legumes,
Hmm.
fruits, vegetables. As long as you kind of cover that range, then it's not too difficult to get it in.
Yeah. And then what if somebody had like they had their, let's say they have a protein bar as a snack. Obviously we know that's
Mhm.
a processed food item, but some of those
Yeah.
do carry a pretty high amount of fiber.
Yep.
Obviously that's a supplement, but would that kind of suffice into the fiber too?
It would count towards the
Hmm.
total. Yeah,
Okay.
it would.
Okay.
It would.
Last question about fiber is
Yeah.
you have the whole camp of counting net carbs. So if somebody's
Mhm.
counting carbs, um, do you suggest that they take away the fiber or do they just count the total carbs?
Okay, so the technical answer
Hmm.
is that fiber is kind of within the carb umbrella,
Hmm.
but fiber is not as digestible. It doesn't yield as much metabolizable energy as non-fiber carbs.
Hmm.
So just put a little bit more simply, regular old carbs, they yield about 4 calories per gram.
Right.
Fiber yields about 2 calories per gram.
Okay.
So anybody who thinks that they can just consume fiber unlimitedly and they're not getting any calories out of it, they're mistaken.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to nitpick, then you would just count fiber as 2 calories per gram.
Okay.
But if you didn't want to nitpick, then and that's fine. It'll depend on what your goals are. So
Hmm.
if somebody had a if somebody had a weight loss goal,
Hmm.
then they would kind of want to err on the side of eating fewer calories, right?
Yeah.
And so if they're only counting net carbs, then they would potentially be making things harder for themselves by kind of not realizing that, oh boy, that those fiber grams are providing 2 calories each, right? So it's like it depends on how badly you want to nitpick.
Yeah.
I would just I wouldn't take the net carbs approach if you're trying to lose weight.
Okay. Yeah, because that can get you in trouble. I remember doing that in my first bout of bodybuilding. I was getting these coffee drinks, and my coach was like, "Why are you not, you should be losing weight at this point." And it was all online. And I don't know. Well, I was getting these 0 calorie
Mm,
coffee
mm,
drinks, and they were full of
yeah.
these sauces that had
Mm,
fiber. And so
mm,
they were telling me that they weren't any calories, where at the end of the day, a calorie is a calorie. And
yeah.
there you had it.
Yeah.
We found the solution. So that's
Yeah.
a good point. So don't, in general, just kind of just count the carbs and
Count
just make
them.
sure you're getting your fiber. That's your best bet.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay. Um, and with that, like, should we be eating the same on rest days as we do on days that we weight train and exercise? Because that's also a question. Like,
Mm,
somebody
mm.
that's, let's say, a general fat loss muscle. With fat loss, I'm always going to have muscle gain in there too, because that's going to be our goal, is to gain muscle while losing a little bit of fat. Nothing crazy, nothing fast. So that's always a question amongst the groups: is, hey, should I be eating the same amount of carbs, fats, protein that I'm eating on my training days, on my rest days?
The only time that matters
Hmm.
is if there is a performance objective for the training bout, which happens to be endurance oriented.
Okay. Okay. So
In which
basically just keep it
case,
across the board.
yeah, in which case you would want to make sure that you're fueling properly for that athletic
Event. Hmm.
event essentially.
Hmm.
But other than that, what really kind of matters um, is like, well, protein is more of, yeah, you want to be able to nail that daily.
Yeah.
But by the end, the rest of the stuff, it's okay. By the end of the week, did you hit the average daily amount?
So it's gonna be weekly, um, is
Yeah,
if they wanna look at it in the big
basically
picture. Is weekly.
in the big
So
picture.
people
Yeah,
they can carb cycle, they could calorie cycle, they could have low
yeah,
carbs a couple days, low calorie a couple days, as long as at the
yeah.
end of the week, it
As long as at the
whatever
end of
they
the week
prefer.
it checks out.
Yeah.
But now here's like the nuance there is
Mhm.
some people actually can comply better long term with their programs when certain days they don't feel like they're dieting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if somebody's just linear caloric restriction, the same deficit every day,
Mhm.
and they don't experience any days in the week where they feel like they're, pulled off the gas,
Yeah. Yeah.
then it it can be less sustainable in
So
the
that would
long
be more
term.
of like the diet break sort of thing, but you could even implement
Mhm.
that weekly, is what you're saying. It's kind of
Yeah,
like have a
you can have
structured
diet
program
break
during the week.
days.
Yeah, have a
Yeah,
structured program when you're busy, and then when you're a little more lax, you could have a little more calories on those days, as long as it taps out at the end of the
as long
week.
as it checks out at the end of the week, yeah,
Mhm.
and, like, it gets a little bit potentially complicated because it's like this, when you train,
Mhm.
you still there is a recovery and remodeling process
Mhm.
that lasts not just hours, but days.
Yeah.
So a resistance training bout, a single bout of resistance training, a regular old bout of lifting,
Yeah.
your body is remodeling at the lean tissue level for up to 48 hours after that resistance training bout. So you have an
Mhm.
opportunity to feed that recovery for
48
2 days after,
hours. You guys hear
yeah,
that? 2 days.
after the bout.
Yes.
So, if you skimp on a given day thinking, okay, I'm conserving calories, oh yeah, you might be, but if your goal was to, let's say, gain muscle or maximally preserve it, then you might
It's
be
always to
compromising
gain
that goal.
muscle. Come on. The goal is always to gain
Always to gain
muscle.
muscle.
Yes. No matter what we talk about, it's always to gain muscle. Let's just set that to some capacity.
Yes.
Okay. Um, So I wanted to go over a couple of these real quick, debunking the myths. Microwaves, you went over that the other day. Is that
Yeah.
ruining our food? Can we use a microwave and still be safe to have our nutrients?
Yeah, that's an old myth, and in
Okay.
fact, there's a lot of research showing that because when you microwave, you don't have to subject the food to heat as high or as long as the time as conventional cooking. Now, I'm talking about reheating.
Yes,
I'm not talking
reheating. I'm
about
not talking about cooking a
frickin'
turkey in the
cooking
microwave. Yes.
from the raw state. I mean, then you're
No, no,
doing
no.
it
I would
wrong,
never do
man.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a I'm against
Hard
that
pass.
for sure, 100%, man.
I'm talking
Unless
like
it's
a minute.
oatmeal.
Yes, oatmeal. Yeah, that's a different story. I don't think it
Oatmeal,
falls under that category.
different ball game, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, you're not gonna put a turkey in the microwave. You're not gonna
No,
put a filet mignon in the microwave, man. That should
I'm
be
not coming
a
over for that meal.
that should be a felony, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But
so
reheating
reheating,
our rice and chicken.
yeah,
Let's keep it
reheating
simple.
food when you're literally talking about 30 seconds to like, 2, 3 minutes or whatever. That has been shown to have negligible differences in terms of its effect on nutrient retention, nutrient yield, compared
Yeah.
to conventional heating. And in a lot of cases, it has better nutrient retention
Okay.
than conventional reheating.
So we're safe to
So,
use microwaves and our
oh
nutrients
yeah,
will be safe for our cells.
yep,
Okay.
yep. The
Okay.
fear of microwaves is unfounded across a replication of
It
studies.
still is out there. It's still out there. The fear of microwaves, the fear of
Yeah,
seed oils. You don't have to get all really into that because that's a whole nother conversation. But can we just clear
yeah.
that real quick and say that seed oils are safe or unsafe?
They're
In the context
just
of
as
using them a little bit here and there, not drinking a bottle of seed oil.
Yeah, they're just as honestly, and it depends on the seed oil.
Yes.
Because a fun bit of trivia for you,
Hmm.
canola oil is a seed oil,
Yes.
and it actually outperforms olive oil for improving blood lipids.
We actually teach that at the ICR. Our
Oh,
patients
cool.
are they can use olive oil, but the oil of choice for them to use for cooking, because obviously it's low fat, they have to improve their lipids, is canola oil. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
So they're all viable options. I personally don't know anybody on the planet who has a bottle of cottonseed oil that they use for anything,
I have no idea. Yeah.
right?
How would you even get that?
Doesn't even exist, and people are just they freak out. It's like, oh, there's a guy, ooh, cottonseed
Yeah.
oil. Okay, who uses cottonseed oil?
Right.
Um,
It's inflaming my
Sesame oil
body.
is actually a ton
Delicious.
of research showing its health effects. And now people who are a little more savvy with their fear mongering will say, well, seed oils are rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids that are susceptible to oxidation under
Hmm.
high heat, cooking, and all that stuff. And then the response to that is, okay, that sounds great and all, but what happens with hard outcomes? What happens with measurable health outcomes, either intermediate outcomes like blood biomarkers or the hard endpoints like disease states
Yeah.
or death, mortality?
Yeah.
What does the data look like with that? And it's actually more in favor of the seed oils than it is for things like butter and lard.
Yeah.
So,
Because there's some people with health issues that have to lower their lipids. That's literally they need to do that to save their life.
yeah,
So they
yeah,
would be better off using canola oil if they use an
yeah,
oil.
better. The
Hmm.
majority of the research shows that when you swap out saturated fat rich
Hmm.
cooking oils with polyunsaturated fats, then all of these markers improve.
Yeah.
All of your risk for disease and death goes down. And you know what? If there was a real true threat of seed oils, then we just wouldn't see that with the preponderance of the evidence.
Yeah.
And look, if seed oils were a genuine, consistent health threat in the peer reviewed literature, in the bulk of
Hmm.
it, I'd be the first person to say, hey, we need to stay away from seed oils.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's just not the
But
case. And
until
it's,
that day
yeah,
comes, this is where the research stands.
yeah,
And that's
that's where
kind
it
of
is.
the and that's your
Like
stance on all
how
of
do
it.
you how do you want to, how do you want to achieve disease? Through oxidized polyunsaturated fat products, or through screwed up blood lipids and the march towards atherosclerosis through saturated fats? How do you want to die? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's right.
You're gonna get there anyway.
Yep.
The best you can do is just predominate your diet with high quality foods.
Hmm.
Good sources of oil are extra virgin olive oil,
Hmm.
um, canola oil, even though my wife doesn't like the texture of it and
Hmm.
stuff. So we just use mostly extra virgin olive oil at
That's
home.
we use that at home most of the time. What about
Mhm.
avocado oil? Is that pretty
Avocado
good? Because we
oil
use that.
as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's another good choice. And I I like coconut. Anything remotely coconutty, I like it. I know there's some controversy about the publications that either like coconut oil or they don't. But
Yeah.
I think, but when you dig deeper, the American Heart Association publications, for example, that warn against coconut oil because of their effects on blood lipids and heart health and stuff like that, they typically fail to sub-analyze the studies that strictly use extra virgin coconut
Coconut.
oil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is you can't throw the other stuff, the refined, bleached, deodorized, and or hydrogenated coconut oils in with extra virgin coconut oil, which really consistently, like I've seen 4 out of 5 studies now showing that it doesn't change LDL cholesterol,
Wow.
and it can raise HDL cholesterol, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
So it overall, extra virgin olive oil has
But
neutral-ish
either
effect
way,
on blood.
we shouldn't be
I'm
drinking
sorry,
bottles
extra
of
virgin
oil,
coconut oil,
coconut
extra
oil. Yeah.
virgin coconut
Yeah.
oil, and not
I know
olive
what
oil.
you meant.
Yeah,
But either way, we shouldn't be drinking bottles of oil anyway, so you shouldn't worry a whole lot about it. Um,
yeah, and
yeah.
that's the big picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the big picture. People are worrying about stuff they don't need to worry about. They're
Small
missing
little
the
details.
forest
Yeah. Hmm.
for the tree. They're like focusing on this single tree. They're missing the whole forest. They're missing
Hmm.
the point.
Hmm. Yep. And I think that's always my take home message. Like, well, what's the bulk of your diet? What's really that important? Like, what other factors can we change? Sleep, exercise, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So let's not focus on just that one thing. So okay, so I think we covered all of those things. Again, there's like pages. Oh, I would get people would be mad at me if I did not ask you about amino acid supplementation in regards to people that are following a vegan nutrition plan, not people that are eating meat, or even vegetarian, but just vegans, is amino acid supplements. Are they useful? And then creatine overall, for the general public losing fat, gaining muscle. Creatine,
Okay,
amino
so
acids.
with the vegan diets, there's been recent research rolled out showing that they can run pretty well compared to omnivorous diets for muscle size and strength gain, as long as total daily protein is at the level it needs to be, which is 1.6
Which
grams per
is
kilogram of
hard.
body weight.
For which that's what they're coming from a point of they're having a hard time getting their protein levels up. So would an amino acid supplement be beneficial for them for muscle
Well,
gain?
the short answer would be yes.
Hmm.
If they can't hit that optimal amount,
Yes.
then they can either. Now, I have a preference towards people supplementing with protein powder rather
Yeah,
than
yeah,
getting let's say, a full spectrum essential amino acid
that's
supplement,
a great
although
point.
that would work too.
Hmm.
I have a preference towards people getting some sort of a blend of pea protein, rice protein, soy protein, or
Hmm.
just any either just soy by itself or
Hmm.
pea protein by itself. Or I'd rather see people get a variety of plant proteins and not necessarily overly rely on soy protein, even though it's performed pretty well in the literature looking at muscle adaptations to training.
Yeah,
But yeah, if somebody, for example, can only get in the RDA for
yeah,
protein, which 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight,
fifty
what is that
grams or
like?
something.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
it's
50,
really low.
40, 40, 50 grams. if they literally can only do that, and sometimes that's the case with the elderly population,
Hmm.
you can build a case for supplementing the diet with a full spectrum essential amino acid supplement.
Yeah, but
You
that's a great point. Is to it would be better if you're going to choose a supplement to just eat a protein powder. They're a lot
with the
more
protein
delicious
powder.
anyway. Um, you can make them
They're,
into lots of
and
yummy things.
they have more than just the isolated amino acid. They have
Yeah,
nutrition beyond that, the
yeah.
amino acids by themselves.
Sometimes there's fiber and things like that. So no, that's a really great point. And then
Yeah,
what
there's
about create?
fiber, there's antioxidants, there's
Hmm.
a bunch of good stuff.
Yeah, I got one here. So this is I have to do plant protein because I can't digest casein. Um,
Hmm.
my body doesn't like it. Um,
Mm.
this one has pea, pumpkin, and flax
Yeah,
protein.
nice.
Yeah, so it digests pretty well. But that's my choice, and I've had good luck with it. So that's a
What
really good.
brand?
It's
What brand do you got?
Owen. It's Owen. It's OWYN. The company
Yeah.
actually, I tag them all the time, and they reached out they they had put in one of their emails,
Mm.
because I always pronounce it Own,
Mhm.
OWYN, but it's
Yeah.
Owen,
Okay.
OWYN. Only what you need. It's a pretty good brand. I like it.
Cool.
Um,
I got it.
but yeah, I like it. Um,
Yeah.
so that's a good point, is to just supplement with protein if you're going to supplement with something. And then creatine. So that's always, that's a big one. I've taken it. I never took it for bodybuilding. I actually just
Mhm.
started taking it in my 40s
Yeah.
for health reasons, not for muscle gain.
Mhm.
That's a side, benefit of it. But what about creatine for muscle gain and then just general health? This is for most of my women that are 35 and up asking this question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Creatine.
Creatine is one of those supplements where there's almost nothing it can't do.
Okay.
It's almost like,
And it's so well studied, right?
it's one of those the benefits are so far ranging that it seems like just hype, but it's
Hmm.
not. I mean, it benefits all the lean tissues across the body,
Yeah.
and it even benefits
And like your
joint tissue.
brain.
It benefits neurological tissues, brain tissue. It cognitive function. There's an emerging literature on that where showing creatine helps with that. It's
Hmm.
not just for getting jacked and swole anymore.
Yeah.
It's almost like a conditionally essential type of nutrient. I mean, I'm not going to
So
say that.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Don't quote me on
Don't
that, but
quote him on that.
it is an important component, and I'm not opposed to people just throwing it into their diet as a matter of just standard, you know, protective, preventive
Measures. Hmm.
measures. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and that would now how young can people take creatine? Because that's a question too. We have,
Mhm.
teen athletes, and now I'm old enough to where we're training our clients' kids. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
how, what about creatine for kids? Is there anything that, for that?
There's no data really on that. There's no systematically investigated creatine questions with kids and adolescents, but the safety profile appears to be just fine. I mean, there's even hypotheses floating around about that may be good for pregnant women to be
Mm,
taking creatine during that time of increased metabolic demand.
yeah.
And yeah, and
Wow.
so certainly, if creatine is good for the unborn, it's
For
good for the
kids.
kids too.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Um,
I didn't let my kids hop on creatine until they were 16. I
sure.
just wanted them to get into the routine of focusing on diet first, diet first, diet first. And then you
Yeah.
can kind of get cute after a certain point. But I'm not opposed. If somebody wants to throw creatine at their 13-year-olds, I don't think it's biologically plausible to be worried about a normal low dose maintenance dose of creatine.
And and then what is that, 5 grams? 5 grams.
Five
But
grams,
you would
yeah.
probably go by
Three to
weight for
three
a
to
kid.
five grams.
Yeah.
Three to
Okay.
five grams, depending on the size of the person. I mean, you can build a case for somebody like Halfthor, the mountain in Game of Thrones, to be taking 10 grams of creatine a day. But yeah,
But
it's
at least
typically
do
it's
like 3 to 5.
3 to 5. That's right.
Okay. 3 to 5
Yeah.
every day, just kind of your general.
Mhm.
And I think I would go back to even like with a kid. I don't really ever suggest that. I let my kids have shakes if they want it. It's definitely not a requirement. I have a almost 8-year-old and 10-year-old. They know their way around the kitchen. They know what a protein is, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I would almost, I guess, from the background I come from, um, for supplementation wise, I would probably, maybe treat it as a protein shake as they got older and not really say, hey, take this creatine because it can build your muscles. Because that kind of
Yeah.
opens up the door to like other conversations in that muscle
Yeah.
building
Yeah.
world, which
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
always very conscious of, given the world that
Yeah.
that we're in and kind of what my
Mhm.
kids are exposed to, with people lifting weights and things. So I guess
Yeah.
for me, I would always be sensitive to that subject to say, hey, if you want to talk about creatine with your kids, just talk about it like a protein shake. Don't talk about it like a supplement.
And
You know,
because it can be a slippery slope for
that's what
some
I mean. Yeah.
kids
hmm
who are
Because
under the impression that,
I was a
you
at
look
all
at
costs
the
kid.
influencers.
hmm
You were at what?
I was
I like totally like,
I said I was at an all cost kid where I was,
uh,
13,
okay.
14,
Uh-huh.
buying when it was legal ephedra in the middle of the mall because the
Oh,
girl in the
damn.
magazine and Oxygen told me I should take that, and I did,
Oh,
at those ages.
yeah.
And thank God
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
okay. Um,
Yeah.
but that can
Yeah.
get dangerous.
Woo!
Mhm.
Yeah, I
A time
remember
of life.
that I remember that era when they
Yep.
actually had that, like, over the counter and even on the shelves, and even within drinks, there were certain drinks
Yeah.
that
You could get the
had,
yellow jacket drinks and
oh
all
my
the things.
gosh,
Yeah, it was, I mean, no wonder, some of those, I would have some rapid heartbeats and all that
dude,
stuff. I'm like,
okay,
oh my
so
gosh.
there was a drink that had it, and my friends and I called it blackout cake.
That sounds safe.
Because it would just make you feel like you on a black make you feel like you're blacking out. Like,
Yeah.
while you're training, it was just not a good thing at all.
Yeah. Some of this
And
stuff, man.
so,
And then it gets pulled off the
yeah.
shelf because it had illegal substances and they
Yeah, they find
resurface
out
it
after
back
the
again
fact.
and they put a
Yeah.
new label on it. Yeah.
Yep.
So if know your sources, and creatine's
Yeah.
safe, but don't open the door to the other things because
Yeah.
like you said, it's a slippery slope.
And another part of that slippery slope, Pam, is what the kids see on social media with
Yeah.
these young folks totally geared up
Yeah.
in their teens,
Yep.
and they're thinking, wow, this guy's getting all the popularity, all the
Mhm.
glory, and all the girls are looking at this guy, and teenage boys, they want to have the physique, and they want to have this, and they're seeing these guys all juiced up, all geared up, and when you introduce supplements and substances towards that end, you just really have to be careful
Yeah.
about how they handle it, just from a
A social
perspective and a
aspect.
psychological, psychosocial point of view. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, no, I
they
agree.
yeah,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
I think you and I were fortunate not to have that, when we were younger because we kind of had to find our own ways and really find that 1% in the magazines. And, we had to seek it out where now it's like in your face. And, I experienced that with my 7-year-old this morning, even just from a hairstyle that she found. She's like, let me look up a hairstyle for you to do my hair before I go to school. And it was on YouTube, and I'm trying to do it. Her hair's not as long. It wasn't as clean. I was like, babe, that's not going to work for you. She got so frustrated. And I immediately said, this is the negative side of any social media. You don't have that girl's hair. Like, that's an unrealistic expectation for you, babe. And it was just it was a conversation point, but it made me even just think today, like, wow, this is the beginning because they want this to look this so perfect way that they see, and it is, it's a whole thing. But I will tell you that I have educated my kids as much as I can through just conversation, and they know what I do for a living, and they know that I competed and all of that thing, and they're into their own sports, and they know what PEDs are, and I have shown them images like this person does and this person doesn't, and I do show them the differences of people that I personally know, and I'm not saying one's bad or one's better, but these two are two separate images. of somebody that chooses to do that and somebody that doesn't. Not taking away hard work, but it's just kind of a conversation. I never want to have, their head in the sand either. And maybe that's a
Hmm.
bad approach, but I feel like if we talk about it, it can be talked about a little bit more overall.
I think it's very important to talk
Yeah.
about it and just be real transparent about it and
Yeah.
just kind of convey the message that, the people who look like this,
Mhm.
they didn't suddenly just feel like everything in their life was great once they hit a certain level of jackedness.
Yeah.
It
That's
doesn't
a good point.
happen like that. And
Mhm.
in fact, a lot of the people who look just spectacular, a lot of
Mhm.
them are pretty miserable a lot of the
Mhm.
time. And so just sort of, the kids understanding how this works,
How the whole world
and
works,
the
yeah.
risks involved and like especially with hopping on um at a young age.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a great conversation to have. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of literature on this topic too that
Yeah,
you
it's
can
a
talk
whole
about.
nother
It's great.
a whole nother conversation for sure. But I
Yeah.
think the more we talk about it and kind of make it just basic conversation, and table talk, and we can talk about it. It's no big deal. And you're right. The people when I looked my best, and I would have been the best social media trainer back in the
Yeah.
day before social media. Well, we had MySpace. Um, um, hey, I won a lot of stuff. I won sponsorships on MySpace. Um,
Dang.
I felt my worst. I was
Yeah.
a very part of me miserable human being.
Mhm.
But I looked the best, and
Yeah.
I would have told a mom of 5, there's no excuses, just get in the gym. Where now I'm a mom of 2 and I'm like, well, I'm so sorry. Like I still know some of those people and I'm like, I'm so sorry I said that because I don't even have time, you know? So it's kind of fun to look at. So
Yeah,
anyway,
it's good.
I am so glad that you came on. Again, I could ask you a lot more stuff. I hope that people follow all of your stuff, and I'm going to link it all. He writes a monthly newsletter that you've had since like 2009. It's been a long time. You've had that
2008.
8.
2008.
Okay, you've had that
Yeah.
newsletter,
Yeah.
and that's monthly. It is a
Yep.
subscription, but it's worth it. And you have also written a book. You guys,
Yeah.
he literally
Mhm.
wrote the book on flexible dieting.
I
Okay,
did.
that's
That's
literally the
right.
name of the book.
Yeah.
So you
I
guys
wrote the
can
book
get
on
that.
it.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, follow along his social media. I will link all of your information below. I know you have a couple things coming up, some like events coming up
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Real
they can
soon.
kind
In
of,
a
yep.
week. Yeah.
Okay, and that you can talk about that that is something that people can purchase, but they can kind of enter, like they can talk with you guys on that. How's that
Oh,
working?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Well, depending on how quick this episode comes out, this is,
Hmm. Hopefully
um
tomorrow. I usually get them out pretty fast
oh, dang,
because I
okay.
forget.
So, it's on January 27th, so, like a week from when we're recording right now,
Okay.
like a little bit over a week out.
Okay.
And, yeah, just go over to my the link in my profile. It'll be in there.
On your
It's
Instagram.
a Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
really cool seminar where one of my colleagues covers exercise, the other one covers mindset, psychology, and the other one covers gut health,
Mhm.
nutrition for gut health, and I cover nutrition for muscle gain and fat loss. And these folks that I'm working with, Chris Barakat, Casey Joe, and Dasha Golnick, they're just real high level professionals, and it's insane how many people miss out on
Yeah.
this kind of level of learning opportunity that they'll have access to for a lifetime. I mean,
Sure.
they're making it available permanently if
Okay.
you register. So,
Yeah.
but you do have to set aside, 5 hours on Saturday
Is it
to watch it if you want to
recorded
watch it
for
live.
those that
It
purchase
is
that? Is it
recorded.
recorded? Okay, so they can
It
just
is.
watch it
Hmm.
snippets and on their own time. Well, that's really
Yep.
cool.
Yeah.
I love, love, love all of your work, and I love your attitude towards everything because you are so very non-judgmental of the space, and you're very understanding of kind of where everybody's coming from and that everybody's in a different spot. There's a lot of people on the social media space that can really make people feel lousy for some of the choices that they make if they were wrong. And you don't portray that. And that is why I was so very excited to have you on as the nutrition expert and to clear some of the air, because I don't know, you're really respectful in the way that even if you debunk something, you still give them space to say what they're going to say.
Yeah.
And if for some reason they could prove you wrong, even if you're laughing inside, you give it to them.
Yes.
So I don't
So,
know. I feel like it's a real class act. I love following you and your wife, and I definitely will post up everything for everybody to follow here
well, I want to thank you right back for
too.
the wonderful job that you do,
Well,
and
thanks.
the way that you're able to come across and reach your audience and teach them what they need to know. It's not easy, and I want you to definitely keep up the good work. And I
Oh, thanks.
sincerely want to thank you for having me on and providing such an awesome just range of questions that we could just go into,
Forever and ever. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's so exciting to see. So thank you so much. It was truly an honor. And I'll just post everything up and I'll let you know when this drops.
Cool. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Pam.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right.